We're going to talk a little bit about whether or not I believe that it was just completely accidental, or whether or not there was some intent in this. So we're watching this right here. Bria Hartley comes up for the layup. She throws the pass and she immediately falls down on Sophie Cunningham's leg.
Bria Hartley's suspension has sent shockwaves through the WNBA. But what really has fans buzzing isn't just the punishment, it's her tantrum after the fact. On the surface, this was supposed to be a routine disciplinary move. A player crossed the line, the league stepped in, and order was restored. But Hartley didn't just accept her suspension quietly. Instead, she lashed out, fueling a storm of controversy that has everyone questioning whether the WNBA is losing control of its players and its image. And then there's Sophie Cunningham, the player at the heart of this mess, now sidelined after the brutal collision that left fans in disbelief. What should have been a clear example of the league protecting its athletes has turned into a spotlight on chaos, favoritism, and a widening divide between stars, enforcers, and leadership. And this, as you'll see, is just the beginning.
Bria Hartley is throwing a pass right here. Kelsey Mitchell helps in. Sophie Cunningham, in fairness, is not fully helped over. Sophie Cunningham should be a step or two out in this scenario. And Bria Hartley goes and rises. Sophie Cunningham should be a little bit more over. She throws the pass. She is off balance by the looks of things here. She kind of falls and then takes Sophie Cunningham down with her. It's hard to tell. And like, look, this is one of those things where it's like, if this wasn't Bria Hartley, I don't think anyone would be questioning whether or not this was intentional.
It was supposed to be just another hard-fought WNBA game, the kind fans have come to expect when intensity runs high and rivalries flare up. But in an instant, that expectation turned into outrage. Sophie Cunningham, known for her relentless hustle and no-nonsense toughness, was bringing the ball up the court when Bria Hartley closed in. What happened next wasn't the kind of physical contact you chalk up to basketball being basketball. It was reckless, dangerous, and many would argue deliberate.
Bria Hartley dives for Sophie Cunningham's knees, doesn't even try to avoid the collision, doesn't try to move out the way. Bria Hartley sees Sophie's legs and says, "That's the direction I'm going to fall in." Even though she was getting defended from the right side, pushing her left, she decides to fall straight forward with a little bit of shoulder action, falling into Sophie Cunningham's knees. Bria Hartley is a dirty player. There's no other way to slice this cake.
Hartley barreled into Cunningham, sending her crashing to the hardwood. The sound of her hitting the floor echoed through the arena, leaving teammates and fans frozen in shock. Cunningham clutched her leg, her face twisted in pain as trainers rushed to her side. The energy in the building shifted immediately. This wasn't just a foul. This wasn't the typical bump and grind of a physical sport. It felt like something else, an intentional act that crossed the invisible line between competition and assault.
Now you take a dive towards Sophie Cunningham's knees. Bria Hartley, you know how much of the benefit of the doubt you deserve in this case? The answer is 0.
The broadcast replay only added fuel to the fire. Slow motion showed Hartley's aggressive extension, the kind of movement that doesn't happen by accident. Commentators struggled to find words, some calling it reckless, others outright labeling it dirty. Social media erupted within minutes, with clips of the collision spreading faster than wildfire. Fans weren't debating whether Cunningham was fouled, they were questioning whether Hartley should ever be allowed back on the court. The immediate aftermath told its own story.
Based on your previous action, your reputation precedes you. Based on your previous actions, I need to assume all of these plays that you take place in are dirty plays, because that's the kind of player you are.
Cunningham had to be helped off the floor, unable to put weight on her injured leg. The camera panned to Hartley, and instead of remorse, she looked defiant, even annoyed that play had stopped. That reaction became a focal point. In sports, accidents happen, but body language can reveal intent. And to many, Hartley's attitude was as damning as the hit itself. The Indiana Fever's bench was livid. Teammates shouted at officials, demanding answers, demanding protection. Caitlin Clark, already no stranger to hard hits this season, stood stunned at how easily her teammate had been taken out. The referee's response: a technical on Cunningham for complaining earlier in the game, and nothing flagrant assessed in the moment. It was the kind of officiating lapse that left fans seething and critics calling the league a circus. By the time the suspension was handed down, days later, the narrative had already spiraled. For many, it wasn't about whether Hartley would miss games. It was about the fact that she had taken out one of the Fever's most important players and barely showed regret for it. Instead of closing the chapter, the league's ruling only cracked the door wider for questions about favoritism, incompetence, and unchecked violence on the court. And here's where the story gets even messier. Hartley didn't take her suspension. Quietly, in fact, her reaction turned the fallout into an even bigger controversy, one that would soon spill beyond the hardwood and into the headlines. When Bria Hartley was first suspended for attacking Sophie Cunningham, many fans weren't shocked. They were frustrated, but not surprised. That's because Hartley has developed a reputation that precedes her. This wasn't her first brush with controversy, nor was it the first time people questioned her style of play. For years now, whispers around the league have painted her as one of the most physical, borderline reckless players on the court. And for Sophie Cunningham supporters, the incident simply confirmed what they had been saying all along. Hartley plays dirty, and eventually, someone was going to get seriously hurt. Look back over Hartley's highlight reel, and you'll see flashes of talent, quick cuts, aggressive defense, and bursts of energy that can change a game. But tucked between those flashes are the darker moments. Clips of Hartley yanking Angel Reese out of the air by her hair went viral earlier this season. Fans still remember when she shoved Becca Allen with such force, it looked more like a wrestling move than a basketball play. Each time, the league shrugged, handed out a light penalty, or ignored it altogether. Each time, Hartley escaped with little consequence. That lack of accountability only fed the growing perception that she could get away with anything. It's not uncommon for players to have an edge. The WNBA has always had enforcers, players whose toughness sets the tone, who are willing to push the limits of physicality. But Hartley's critics argue she doesn't just push the limits, she crosses them. While others use toughness to intimidate or create space, Hartley seems to seek out opportunities to make her mark through. Collisions that look less like defense and more like targeted takedowns. What makes this worse is how the league has handled it. Fans believe the WNBA has been too slow, too hesitant to protect its stars from players like Hartley. Every time another foul was brushed off, it added to her confidence. And every time the referees swallowed their whistles, it sent the message that her style of play was acceptable. The Cunningham incident was the breaking point. But the warning signs were flashing long before. Even off the court, Hartley hasn't helped her image. When confronted with criticism, she's been known to fire back, dismissing complaints as soft or accusing rivals of overreacting. That defiance fuels her supporters, who admire her toughness, but it also hardens her critics, who see her as unapologetic and unwilling to change. After Sophie's injury, Hartley's body language spoke volumes. No hand extended to help. No visible concern, just a scowl as she walked away. It cemented the idea that this wasn't just heat of the moment aggression, it was who she was, and that's why this suspension has hit differently. This time, the league couldn't brush it off. This time, a player's season was ended, a team's chemistry was shattered, and fans had undeniable evidence of what happens when dirty play is allowed to fester. Yet the bigger question remains: why did it take this long for Hartley's reputation to catch up to her? Because for Indiana and for Caitlin Clark, the consequences are already devastating, and the worst may still be ahead. To understand the full weight of Sophie Cunningham's injury, you have to first understand what she brought to the Indiana Fever. Cunningham wasn't just another role player filling a roster spot. She was energy, toughness, and confidence rolled into one. From the moment she stepped onto the court for Indiana, she changed the dynamic of the team. She played with an edge, the kind of grit that doesn't always show up on the stat sheet, but makes all the difference in the fight for wins. Loved her fire. Teammates trusted her. And most importantly, Caitlin Clark had someone willing to take hits, deliver hits back, and make it clear that Indiana wasn't going to let their superstar get pushed around night after night. Sophie was more than a teammate to Clark. She was her protector. Every time Clark got shelved, every time she got hammered, with no whistle, Cunningham was right there, stepping up, getting in faces, and making sure the message was clear: Indiana wasn't going to be bullied. That role mattered more than people realize. Clark, for all her generational talent, has been the target of brutal physicality since her first game. Defenders double her, trap her, shove her off her spot, and often the referees let it go. Without someone like Sophie in the lineup, Clark becomes even more vulnerable. Losing Cunningham doesn't just weaken Indiana's defense or spacing, it takes away their enforcer, their emotional leader, and the one player unafraid to escalate when opponents cross the line. Cunningham's contributions weren't just emotionally either. She was producing at a high level, hitting threes, making smart passes, and defending like every possession mattered. She wasn't afraid to dive on the floor, take charges, or mix it up in the paint. In a season already plagued by injuries for Indiana, she gave them stability and an identity they desperately needed. With her gone, the Fever lose both production and toughness, leaving a glaring hole that no one else on the roster seems ready to fill. Her timing couldn't have been worse. Indiana was finally finding some rhythm, building chemistry, and showing signs they could make noise in the league. Cunningham was a big part of that. She played with a chip on her shoulder, the kind that spread to her teammates and gave the Fever confidence. Now, instead of riding that momentum, Indiana is back to scrambling. Forced to figure out how to survive without one of their anchors, the emotional toll might be the hardest part. Watching Cunningham go down, hearing her yell no on the floor, broke something in that team. They knew immediately this wasn't a minor tweak or a bruise. They knew their fighter was gone. For Caitlin Clark, that loss is personal. Sophie wasn't just defending her physically, she was defending her reputation, showing the league that Indiana had backbone. Without that, Clark is left exposed, and if you think opponents won't notice that weakness, think again. This injury doesn't just hurt Indiana today, it changes the way every other team will game plan against them moving forward. Sophie Cunningham's injury isn't an isolated event, it's part of a disturbing pattern that's tearing through the WNBA this season. Everywhere you look, stars and role players alike are sidelined, and fans are beginning to wonder if the league is spiraling into an injury crisis. It's not just bad luck, it's the direct result of unchecked physical play, poor officiating, and leadership that seems more focused on appearances than solutions. Take a step back and look at the names. Caitlin Clark, the league's biggest draw, has already missed more games than she's played because of the punishment she takes every night. Sydney Colson went down with a torn ACL. Ari McDonald broke her foot. And now, Sophie Cunningham's season has been ripped away by a reckless collision. This isn't just coincidence. It's a trend that points to deeper problems inside the league. The WNBA has been leaning heavily on a marketing narrative that physicality is part of its identity. Officials and even league executives have described the rough play as a badge of honor, claiming it sets the women's game apart. But when that philosophy results in stars piling up in the trainer's room, it stops being a selling point and starts becoming a liability. Fans don't tune in to watch rosters gutted by injuries. They don't buy tickets to see backup squads thrown together at the last minute like a pickup run at a rec center. They want to see the best players performing on the biggest stage. Right now, the league isn't delivering that. The ripple effects are brutal. Teams like Indiana, who already rely heavily on young stars, are suddenly stripped of their depth. Rivalries lose their fire when the key players are missing, and fans who shelled out money expecting to see household names like Clark, Cunningham, or Reese often walk away disappointed, watching lineups patched together with little chemistry. Every injury chips away at the product, eroding the trust of both diehard and casual fans. Even worse, players themselves are starting to speak out. Some whisper about how unsafe the environment feels. Others openly call out the referees for allowing dangerous fouls to slide. Cunningham's injury, in particular, highlighted just how fragile the situation is. If someone like her, a player tough enough to dish it out and take it, can be sidelined by an opponent's reckless act, what chance does anyone else have? The irony is that this isn't the first time a professional league has faced this problem. The NBA in the 1980s and 1990s had its own crisis of escalating violence. Eventually, they recognized that the spectacle wasn't worth the risk. Rules were tightened, flagrant fouls were enforced, and the game became safer without losing its edge. Stars stayed on the court, rivalries flourished, and the league thrived. The WNBA, on the other hand, seems determined to repeat history instead of learning from it. And with every injury, the cost becomes clearer. Careers altered, seasons lost, and a league drifting toward chaos. The question now is, how long can fans and players tolerate this before the demand for real change explodes? If there's one constant thread running through the chaos of this season, it's the refereeing, or more accurately, the lack of it. Time and time again, fans have watched the officials let dangerous plays slide, only to turn around and whistle ticky-tack fouls on routine contact. It's this inconsistency that fuels frustration. And in the case of Sophie Cunningham's injury, it may have been the final straw. Think about the sequence leading up to her collision with Bria Hartley. Cunningham had already been getting hammered. All game long, she complained once, and instead of protection, she got slapped with a technical foul. Then, when Hartley barreled into her nearly 75 feet from the basket, the refs simply waved play on, a player writhing on the floor, clutching her leg, and the officials acted like nothing happened. That single moment crystallized a season's worth of incompetence. This isn't just about one bad call. Fans can forgive human error, a missed travel here, a questionable block charge there. What they can't forgive is a pattern of officiating that consistently ignores dangerous behavior. Hartley's history of rough play didn't appear out of thin air. It developed because refs refused to hold her accountable in earlier games. Pulling Angel Reese's hair, throwing Becca Allen like a rag doll. Each of those should have been an automatic flagrant, maybe even an ejection. Instead, they were brushed aside as just part of the game. The result? Hartley kept pushing the line further until Sophie Cunningham paid the price. What makes it worse is the double standard. Players like Cunningham, who play hard but aren't out there intentionally hurting people, often end up punished for speaking up. Refs don't like being challenged, so they hand out technicals to silence frustration. Meanwhile, the truly reckless players exploit that leeway, knowing the whistle will rarely blow when it matters most. It's an upside-down system that rewards the instigator and punishes the victim. The impact isn't limited to players and coaches. Fans see it too. Social media lights up every time an obvious foul goes ignored, every time Caitlin Clark gets shoved to the ground with no whistle. Clips circulate with captions mocking the refs, comparing them to WWE officials or traffic cones. That ridicule chips away at the league's credibility. People start asking whether the WNBA is more interested in promoting toughness than protecting its stars. It doesn't have to be this way. Other leagues have faced referee credibility crises and fixed them. The NBA instituted strict guidelines for flagrant fouls and improved review systems. Even the NFL, despite its flaws, has clearer protections for players in vulnerable positions. The WNBA, by contrast, continues to look unprepared, reactive instead of proactive. Until officials start enforcing the rulebook consistently, players like Hartley will feel empowered to play recklessly. And as Cunningham's injury proved, it's not just bad optics, it's dangerous. Which begs the question, how many more careers will be jeopardized before the league finally takes control of its referees? When news broke that Bria Hartley wasn't just suspended, but also facing a lawsuit from Sophie Cunningham, the WNBA officially crossed into uncharted territory. Sports fans are used to suspensions, fines, and even ejections. Those are the standard consequences for crossing the line on the court. But a player being sued for what happened in a game, that's new ground. And it has the potential to reshape the entire culture of the league. For Sophie Cunningham, the lawsuit isn't about revenge, it's about accountability. Her season is over, her body is damaged, and her career path has been disrupted. She has medical bills, lost salary, and missed opportunities, all because of one reckless act that went beyond what could reasonably be called basketball. By taking Hartley to court, Sophie is making a statement. If the league won't protect its players, then players will protect themselves through legal action. That idea alone changes the equation for everyone. Suddenly, A flagrant foul isn't just a 2-game suspension and a fine. It could be the start of a civil case that costs a player hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages and legal fees. Endorsement deals could dry up, reputations could be permanently tarnished, and teams might start to think twice about signing players with a track record of reckless behavior. Hartley may be the first, but she likely won't be the last. Imagine the ripple effects. If Sophie succeeds, what's stopping Angel Reese from suing over having her hair pulled midair? What's stopping Becca Allen from filing her own case after being slammed to the ground? And once the precedent is set, every player who feels they were endangered by a reckless act will have a legal pathway outside of the WNBA's disciplinary system. That would fundamentally change how the league operates. For years, critics have said the WNBA rewards physicality at the expense of player safety. This lawsuit could finally force change. The league would be pressured to tighten its rules, train referees more effectively, and hand out meaningful punishments to prevent more legal chaos. No commissioner wants to deal with weekly headlines about lawsuits stacking up against their league. No sponsors want to attach their brand to a sport that looks more like a courtroom drama than professional basketball. Of course, there's also the risk of backlash. Some fans argue that bringing lawyers into the game cheapens the sport, that it opens a Pandora's box where every hard foul becomes a legal claim. But that argument misses the point. This wasn't just a hard foul. This was a deliberate act. That ended a season, maybe even altered a career. If the league had stepped up earlier, none of this would be happening now, and that's the heart of it. The lawsuit is less about Sophie versus Hartley and more about the WNBA itself. It exposes years of negligence, favoritism, and weak leadership. And if Sophie wins, the shockwaves will force everyone from players to referees to the commissioner herself to rethink how this league is run. The question is no longer whether Hartley crossed the line. The question is whether this lawsuit marks the beginning of an entirely new era of accountability in women's basketball. For all the noise around Bria Hartley's suspension and Sophie Cunningham's season-ending injury, the ripple effect lands hardest on one person, Caitlin Clark. Ever since her arrival in the WNBA, Clark has been the lightning rod for attention, pressure, and physical punishment. Defenders swarm her, bump her off the ball, shove her at every opportunity. And she rarely gets the benefit of the whistle. Through it all, Sophie Cunningham became her shield. Now, with Sophie gone, Clark is standing alone in the storm, and the timing could not be worse. Cunningham wasn't just a teammate. She was Clark's bodyguard on the court. Every time Clark took a hard foul, Cunningham was there to push back. Every time opponents tried to rattle her with cheap shots, Cunningham made sure Indiana sent a message of resistance. That presence was invaluable. It gave Clark the freedom to focus on being the generational scorer and playmaker she is, knowing that someone had her back when the game got ugly. With Sophie sidelined, that protection has vanished. Opponents know it too. The WNBA is filled with fierce competitors who study every advantage. And now, with Cunningham out, rival teams see a wide-open target. Clark, already the most fouled and battered star in the league, will become an even bigger focus. Without an enforcer by her side, every drive to the basket becomes riskier. Every screen she fights through, more punishing. The physical toll is only going to grow heavier. The psychological impact shouldn't be ignored either. Clark may not show it, but even the toughest competitors feel the weight when teammates drop one by one. Watching Cunningham carried off the floor, knowing it was the result of yet another reckless act, has to plant doubt in her mind. How long can she keep putting her body on the line in a league that seems unwilling to protect her? How many times? Can she pick herself up off the hardwood before she wonders if it's worth it? This isn't just a personal problem, it's a league problem. Clark is the face of the WNBA, the one player capable of drawing millions of new fans, selling out arenas, and pushing TV ratings to new heights. Losing her, even temporarily, would be catastrophic. Yet the league's failure to protect stars like her sends the exact opposite message. Toughness matters more than talent, and spectacle matters more than safety. It's a dangerous gamble, and one that could backfire spectacularly if Clark's frustration ever boils over. For Indiana, the fallout is immediate. They've lost their edge, their enforcer, and their chemistry. For Clark, the challenge is even bigger. surviving a season where every opponent now knows she's more vulnerable than ever. And for the WNBA, the stakes couldn't be higher. Because if the league can't protect its brightest star, then fans, sponsors, and even players themselves will start questioning whether this league deserves her at all. And that's the haunting reality. Sophie Cunningham's injury didn't just sideline her, it left Caitlin Clark exposed and the entire WNBA on notice. The WNBA now finds itself at one of the most critical turning points in its history. What happened between Bria Hartley and Sophie Cunningham isn't just about two players colliding on the court. It's about what the league chooses to represent, and how it responds when chaos threatens to overshadow the game itself. Right now, the league is teetering between growth and collapse, and every decision it makes from this point forward will shape its future. Consider what's already at stake. Sophie Cunningham's injury has exposed the league's failure to protect its players. Bria Hartley's suspension, while deserved, only scratches the surface of accountability. And the lawsuit that followed has now created a precedent that could open the door to legal battles every time a reckless foul causes harm. Instead of focusing on building its brand and celebrating rising stars, the WNBA is forced to manage headlines about lawsuits, suspensions, and referee disasters. Fans are noticing too. For decades, the biggest complaint surrounding the WNBA has been lack of visibility. But with Caitlin Clark bringing in millions of new viewers, the spotlight is brighter than ever. That spotlight is exposing everything the league has tried to sweep under the rug: inconsistent officiating, reckless play, leadership that appears out of touch, and stars being left unprotected. For new fans, that's not a great first impression. For longtime fans, it's confirmation of frustrations they've voiced for years. The league has a choice to make. It can continue down the current path, pretending that physicality is a badge of honor, while star players pile up in walking boots and knee braces. Or it can take a hard look in the mirror, admit that the culture has gone too far, and make real changes. That means retraining referees, instituting strict punishments for dangerous fouls, and putting player safety above the illusion of toughness. Anything less is just lip service. The NBA faced this same dilemma decades ago. In the 1980s and early 1990s, games were brutal: elbows, clotheslines, and outright brawls. But the league realized that protecting its stars was the only way forward. Stricter rules were enforced, flagrant fouls were defined, and players who crossed the line faced real suspensions. The result? Stars thrived, rivalries grew stronger, and fans tuned in more than ever. The WNBA could take the same path, but time is running out. Because here's the reality: fans won't stick around forever. They didn't buy tickets to see Caitlin Clark limping or Sophie Cunningham in a brace. They came to see the best players shine on the court. If those players keep dropping, so will the league's momentum. The Hartley-Cunningham saga isn't just a headline, it's a warning. A league that ignores its problems eventually pays the price. The WNBA has been given a wake-up call. The question is whether it will act on it, or let this moment become the beginning of its downfall. Bria Hartley's suspension and the lawsuit that followed have done more than punish one player. They've ripped the lid off everything wrong with the WNBA right now. Sophie Cunningham is out for the season, Indiana is stripped of its toughness, and Caitlin Clark is left more vulnerable than ever. Fans aren't just angry at Hartley, they're furious at a league that seems unwilling or unable to protect its stars. Lawsuits, suspensions, and endless injuries have turned what should be a breakout season into a crisis. The WNBA has reached a tipping point, and the choices made now will decide its future. Will it crack down, enforce real accountability, and protect the athletes who carry its brand? Or will it keep turning a blind eye, watching stars fall one by one? One thing is certain: Sophie Cunningham's injury is more than a loss. It's a warning the league cannot ignore.